Hey, how are you? And welcome to the For Real podcast, a series of conversations with colleagues and friends from the world of radio, audio and communications who I admire and respect and who have helped, supported and inspired me and many others over the years. They will share great stories, insight and learning to help you find your real voice, your authentic self and the confidence to own it. Before we get going, I want to thank my producer Alex Healy and my mates here at Distorted for hosting me in their fantastic studios in Leeds. Finally, there might be the odd effing and jeffing, but after all, this is For Real. Hey there, I hope all is good with you and thank you for eavesdropping in on me once again. This is episode 6 of For Real. I know, I can't quite believe it either, and your support has been so humbling, thank you. My natter this week is with UK radio royalty David Lloyd, and what a privilege it is. What David hasn't done in radio is a very short list. His experience and accomplishments are extraordinary. Broadcaster, coach, managing director, owner and publisher, regulator, consultant, blogger, podcaster, speaker, and writer of no less than 3 books about the medium he's given so much to. He's worked at the BBC, at the regulatory body, and more time than he probably cares to remember in commercial radio. David has led teams in local radio, national radio, speech and music radio. To be honest, I could go on, but in amongst all of this glittering career, of which he has been an inspiration to so many people, I've never heard a bad word said about him, which is truly remarkable. He has a penchant for a good curry and a nice finger, not necessarily at the same time. And David loves a loud shirt, charging around the workplace in stocking feet, and has been known to walk on the furniture during telephone conversations. And I am honoured he's taken the time out of his incredibly busy schedule to talk to me today. Hey David, how are you?
I'm very well, Roger. I feel quite humble after hearing that. I can't begin to know where you got all the information from.
No, indeed. My sources are very well known to you. Now, having shared an abridged version of your career in radio so far, I'd like to start with what you're busy with right now, and I can see the banner in the background there, Boom Radio. This in itself is an extraordinary story. Why and how did it come about?
I'd sort of half retired. I was quite happy just sort of cantering on, consulting, writing books and doing podcasts and things, really enjoying life. But I had this thought that there was a gap for a radio station for older people. And by older people, I didn't mean very, very, very old people, because they're never us. It's people sort of our age, in their 60s and 70s, who feel got a lot of life left to live. And really, radio is moving away from them for all sorts of reasons. Radio 2 is a younger offering, and I don't say that by way of criticising at all. I can see exactly why they're managing their portfolio in the way they do. But nevertheless, you know, if you're in your 60s or dare to be in your 70s or 80s, the music mix is probably not quite for you, and the people who are talking to you are probably not the sort of people that you would, you know, gravitate to at a table on a night out, to be frank. And BBC Local Radio, similarly, used to be charged with serving 55 pluses. It's not now. So bear in mind, everybody had moved out of that territory. I thought, you know, there's an audience there. The challenge for commercial radio has always been making money out of it, because advertising agencies particularly don't see huge value attached to those people aged over 55. And actually, it's an audience you can buy quite cheaply in so many different media as well. So for all sorts of purposes, revenues are limited, but the audience is there. But I thought originally that there was a hole for a radio station. And actually, if we did it without premises, if we did it from people's homes, broadcast on a rather different model, we could generate a sustainable business. So got together with a trusted old colleague, the brilliant Phil Riley, with whom I worked with at Chrysalis Radio, founders of the Heart brand. And we got together a business, got ourselves on air. And here we are now, 18 months on, with, I think, what we would regard as a success story, and I think a number of others on the outside would too.
I think what's amazing about that, and thinking of you and Phil, the Lennon and McCartney of commercial radio in the UK, you did all of that. So you're serving an older demographic, as you've just explained, and a new, different model, very progressive. And also you launched it in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, wow.
Yeah, it was difficult because, with some presenters, we had to help to install kit, sometimes their kit, in their own homes and get them moving. And of course, we had to do those in the depths of COVID. It was permissible because this was work, but we had to, go around literally in hazmat gear and install it for them and coach them through the whole process. So it was challenging because of COVID, without a shadow of a doubt. And for us, it was challenging. I'd been a fairly senior executive in organisations, and you know what it's like, Roger, when you do that job, you're just signing expenses, sitting in office, putting your feet up. You don't know how to do anything. You hire the right people to do it. Suddenly,
Yeah.
because it's such a small team, we've got to do it all ourselves. And I had to very quickly acquaint myself with the latest version of RCS, Selector and Zeta, and all the software that I'd last worked with sort of 25 years ago in its first incarnations. So we had to acquire a lot of skills as well. But the good thing about being during COVID, and I think a lot of businesses probably found this, it was easier to get FaceTime with people. As a brave new business, we wanted to talk to agencies and talk to partners and people we could work with. And, had we phoned them up, they might have found us, a space in the diary, 9 years on Tuesday, and then cancelled at short notice. But, they can always agree to a 15-minute Zoom. So we're sitting here thinking, goodness, we've got a great audience we're talking to here. So I think we got more FaceTime with people because of COVID in those early days, when we were trying to form relationships, and many of those relationships continue to this day.
And was there any naysayers at the time when you were talking to people, where those people said, this is ridiculous, it'll never happen?
Most people we talked to said, yeah, I'm in. What a great idea. I mean, that was the instinctive response. But you never know. When we went around to friends, really friends and connected parties and people we'd worked with, just saying, have you got a few quid to push into this? And almost without exception, they said yes. And as soon as we got on air and we wanted a bit more money to go national straight away, because we realised within weeks it was flying, we went back and said, what about some more money? And they said, yes, how much? I think most people saw the potential of what we're doing really easily.
And I mean, it's fabulous, and what a great story. And I know there's some more, I'm slightly out of the loop now, but I know there's some more radio figures coming out soon, I think. But the audience growth that you've seen has been incredible.
Yeah, to go from nothing to hundreds of thousands of listeners across the UK is phenomenal. And as you say, we're just about to get our latest audience figures and all the intelligence we have from various sources, because, nowadays with streaming and everything else, you know how you're doing. And we'd be very surprised if we didn't go up yet further. So, isn't it nice to know that we're larger than some, conventional radio stations?
With far bigger budgets, I imagine.
I would say, though, that, our objective has never been to compete against other commercial radio stations. There are some great commercial radio brands, major brands, producing some very, very, very honed, excellent services. And what we want is Radio 2's audience, those people who think they haven't got a listening home anymore.
And obviously, with the way they've been coming to listen to you in their droves, you're satisfying that need brilliantly. Thank you. And I think that's just a fascinating story. And we could talk about Boom Radio for an awful lot longer, just the amazing success it's been. But I want to take you back to your pre-radio days, if I may. What was it about sitting in a studio and talking out into the ether that attracted you to the profession in the first place?
It goes back to, childhood, very much childhood.
Really?
And the magic of this box that made a noise. I mean, I was growing up in the early 60s and having a radio that talked to me. I didn't have many friends as a kid, and this thing in the corner that talked to me was magical. I used to listen to the police messages when they used to be on VHF and FM, and something magical about hearing local place names on there and things happening and the immediacy and the we didn't have a lot of radio stations in those days, and late night I used to listen to Radio Derby down the road. The signal was a bit crackly, but they had their own late night program, and it was just so exciting. And I think from that moment onwards, I wanted to be on the radio. So my first ever appearance was, I think I was age 7, reading out a poem on BBC Local Radio. Actually, must have been a little bit older than that, 8 or 9, reading out a poem on BBC Local Radio. And, all the neighbours gathered round to listen. And it was just a wonderful thing to think that those words were just coming out, and realising how one receives them as a listener and the power those words have. That was the start.
And when did you decide then seriously you think, right, I'm going to find out how I can make a career out of this, how I can get into this world?
Probably the same day, really.
Wow.
It was just what I always wanted to do. There's never any question about. It's funny when I speak to young people now, and they say, "I'm not quite sure whether they want to do X, Y, Z." I'm thinking, I knew that. I just knew I wanted to be on the radio. It seemed like a ridiculous dream. I mean, there were so few radio stations in. Thinking back to the late '60s and early '70s, commercial radio was just beginning in the early '70s, and 10, 19 stations. That was it. So to think that you were good enough to be on one of those, what would it have been? I don't know, 45 stations across the whole country. About 45 stations across the whole country when I was trying to think that you would stand a chance of getting through the door was just ridiculous. It was like saying, I want to be on the stage at the Palladium, but I've not done any acting yet. It was a bit like that. So it was the dream, but I didn't ever think I would. No, I didn't ever think I would achieve it. I think I knew I would achieve it. I just didn't quite know how.
And that's amazing. And did you share that with your parents at the time? And what were their thoughts?
They knew that radio was the thing I loved more than anything else. And they didn't really understand it, but they didn't pressure me to. Well, I think my mum wanted me to be a doctor, but it was only like because she could tell a friend that. And I don't think there was any sort of pushing to be a doctor. She just thought it would be rather nice if I ended up being a doctor. But that clearly wasn't. My mum was Hyacinth Bouquet. Yeah, they were encouraging, and certainly when I started at hospital radio, which I did when I was 16, because I just realised that was the way to sit in a studio and get some experience and do something interesting. And it was nowadays, of course, you can build your own studio in your back bedroom, as we all do. But in those days, if you wanted to play on the equipment and have a nice microphone and record it all, you needed a studio, and the place to have that was hospital radio. And my dad, bless him, used to. The hospital was a long way away, and on a Friday he used to take me there. And as a kid, you just think, "Oh, my dad's taking me there." You don't think, as I now do, he was a rep. He'd driven thousands of miles every day that week. He did 80,000 miles in a year. And I thought, on a Friday, I bet the thing he really wanted to do was to take his son all the way across town and back to hospital radio. But he did. So encouraging, supportive, yes.
That's amazing. I mean, and 80,000 miles on the roads
in a Ford Capri
as well.
One of the very first Ford Capris too.
Wow, I love the old Ford Capri. But we could go down a different avenue there. So parents very supportive. So how did you write into the hospital radio station? Did you just turn up? How did you get in?
Yeah, you have to. I mean, ours was a military organisation for our hospital radio station. It was an excellent one in Nottingham, brilliantly run by people who knew what they were doing not only in terms of programming, but in terms of marketing, in terms of business, in terms of fundraising, in terms of advertising and design. I mean, the whole outfit. Again, you don't realise it. You just think that's how every hospital radio station is. But this radio station was full of people who were, they would walk into jobs now. They were so gifted. So it was a big organisation. You had to apply and go to an interview. I was turned away because I was too young for the first time, and I kept on applying and eventually got back through the door. So, even that was quite a battle. And I was also tremendously shy of me to get on, as I did on Saturdays. My dad didn't take me there on Saturday. I had to get 2 buses to mix with 30 people I didn't know. That was quite something, but I knew I had to sort of put myself through it to do what I dreamed of doing.
That's fascinating, because I posted on LinkedIn a few months ago about how I really struggle with business networking events and meeting new people and crowds of new people generally. And I was amazed that you find such situations terribly awkward too. And there can be a perception that successful people, especially in the public eye, which radio is, are all gregarious raconteurs, and which of course is not the case. But how have you managed such situations over the years? How did you deal with that awkwardness?
With a lot of difficulty, really. I'm not that sociable. One of the things that attracts me to radio is that you can be the person you feel you are inside without embarrassment or anyone judging you, because they're not there. They are there, but through the microphone. And I think that's one of the reasons why I loved radio, and I do my best radio when there's no one else around. You know, some people like a whole cast of thousands with them, and somebody to bounce off. I think, could you just all go away, please? I'll shut the curtains. I'm better on my own. And so, you know, that's why radio attracted me. And you realise that you've got to make contacts and make friends to, you know, to. Yeah, it's good. I have some very good friends now, I have to say. But, you know, you realise that when you go to places, you may not know anyone, and you've got to go around and talk to people. And as you say, it's amazing how many people in our industry feel that way. In fact, somebody DM'd me the other day saying you were the only person that talked to me at an industry event years and years ago. And he said, I always remember that because I didn't know anyone to talk to. And I thought, I can't believe that that you have those problems, because I was feeling much the same thing, and I probably came over to you because you were on your own. I was desperate to talk to someone. Maybe nobody likes these events. Maybe nobody likes talking to people at these events. But it is quite difficult, you know. And as you get better known, people come across and say hello, and you know more people, and it becomes a lot easier, doesn't it? And people join you in the circle that you know and you don't know, and that makes conversation easy. But you know, walking into a room, as you sometimes do, and you think, I do not know a soul here. Whose conversation can I hijack? That's awful. That's all. I'm cringing thinking about it.
Yeah, and it just kind of made me want to kind of run away in those situations. But if you're so well known, so well respected, you do quite a lot of public speaking. You have done over the years, and I've done a little bit myself, and I've found that actually public speaking is fine for me. Standing up on a stage and talking was fine. And this situation that I'm in now, talking to someone I know, love and respect so much, is easy for me. And yet conversely found those situations difficult. You put you in front of a microphone, away you go, and put you on stage, away you go.
Yeah, I think a lot, you know, you and I are exactly the same in all these ways. You know, standing in front of a large crowd is, there's something anonymous about that, is almost easy. I'd love to. You know, the worst thing possible, I always think, is presenting to 6 of your colleagues, people you know, but you have to sort of go into presentation mode, and I can't quite, because there's performance mode, isn't there? And there's like talking to friends mode. And when you're in front of 6 people you know, you think, whoa, who am I supposed to be here? Am I in performance mode? But they'll look at me like an idiot because they know me, so I can't go in performance mode. So it's got to be me, and I'm not quite sure who me is today. So it's yeah, that's the worst thing, isn't it?
And how did you find me on the radio? How did you find who you were?
They always say, don't they, that the best broadcasters are themselves on the radio. Oh gosh, isn't that true? It really is. And the most powerful radio comes from the heart and comes from honesty. And when I was first on Radio Trent in 1980, they brought in this chap called David Dunhill, who was an old BBC name. In fact, his was the voice that closed down the Home Service in 1967. And at the time, I didn't know who he was. There was no Google. You couldn't look up anybody. You're sure this old bloke's called David's coming in to teach you how to speak. You know, all right, if you insist. And he wrote this appraisal of me. It's all typed out with, you know, with the O's typed through on the typewriter because he's pressing on. And this appraisal said he will only ever be any good when he reveals the real him behind the voice. And it was quite. He said there's a superficial gloss which actually works really well, but there's something else there. And it was absolutely true. I didn't understand it. I didn't know what the devil he was writing about, but it's so true. And when you hear, you know, some of the powerful radio that we've had in very challenging times for the United Kingdom, and you've heard the great broadcasters, you know, who are making fun and entertaining, and then suddenly they go and they do a little bit to camera and they talk to you and they talk from the heart about something that's happened to them or whatever. It's just stunning, and that does create the most powerful radio. You've got to have that honesty. You've got to open up a little bit about yourself, and there are ways of doing that which remain inclusive to the audience, because the last thing people want is, you know, it's just the same as human beings. People just talk about themselves all the time. You know, you've got to involve, and there are skills and words and phrases that help you do this, involve the listener in the conversation. Therefore, they feel that they are involved in the story you're telling. And of course, the story itself must, in a sense, relate to their lives as well, in some sense, wherever possible.
Yeah, and I mean, knowing or having it pointed out to you that, you know, how to become your real self and share a little bit on the air is one thing, but how did you go about doing that? How as that shy person that you talked about went into radio and it gave you that kind of safe space in there, how did you then make that change to allow yourself to become more the real you?
I think it's gradual because you realise that when you try it a bit, it works. And it's weird, isn't it? When you're on the air, you know when it's working. There's a feeling. It's as if the microphone is smiling back at you, saying, "That's working. That's cutting through." And you just feel it, and therefore you do more of it. And also, I have to say, age helps as well. Goodness, in so many ways. I can think of few broadcasters who aren't better when they're older. And I don't mean older, I don't mean old like me, but when you start in radio, you might be 17, 18, 19. You haven't met that many people. You've only ever lived the life of 0 to 17. You may be a great entertainer, but you can't relate to as many people. You haven't got as many stories to tell. I mean, you get to our age, Roger, and if someone says X, you can relate to it, you can smile at it, you understand it, you've got something else to add to it, and therefore you sit down to a show and there's so much to talk about. You've got, decades and decades of life and stories and things and little anecdotes that you've told on 17 radio stations already. And here's the 18th. You've just got so much more in you to share. So it does get easier. And also, I'm loving later life. I'm having the most fun I've ever had. And also, you don't give a damn anymore, do you? You think, hey, whatever. And you care less. And that helps. It's like my mother. She was really shy. She was married to a politician, local councillor. He was going to all the functions. She was a very shy wife. In time, she came out and thought, they're all idiots. And then she found herself. So we all do it. It's not just people in radio.
No, absolutely. And I think age is so helpful and so important. In certainly for me, and finding and being comfortable with who I am and where I was, and I see when people younger are starting out in their careers or starting out in life, really, in adult life, in any different spheres and different worlds, are still kind of struggling to know who they are and how to be in the workplace. And I think with social media, I don't think that particularly helps with a lot of them knowing who they are and aspiring to be something that is not really real. I think that sense of authenticity is so important. And as I mentioned in the introduction, you've inspired so many people. And personally, I can't thank you enough for the support you've given me, especially when I took on my most difficult professional challenge, which was at the Radio Academy, and you were so supportive. Thank you.
Thank you.
But who have been the people that have inspired you?
Gosh, so many. I think the broadcasters who inspired me were on my local stations, Radio Nottingham and Radio Trent in those days. People like Dennis McCarthy on Radio Nottingham as a communicator, and and different presenters for different reasons. You get very slick presenters who are good at the tight radio shows, the charts, whatever, like John Peters, brilliant John Peters. It's like Len Groden, his jingles and the way he used those and production techniques. Dennis McCarthy on Radio Nottingham for the power of words and the power of the pause. He just manipulated that so beautifully. So, as a presenter, little bits from everybody. And whenever you start out as a radio presenter, you are a mongrel of all those people trying desperately to be some of them. And you sit and you can hear that. And then gradually you work your way through those. And the influences are still there. The DNA is still there. But you found your own self. And in terms of management, my early boss, Ron Coles, was quite inspiring, just in the way he held the room and the way he commanded authority and just the way he led, I think, as a leader. And then when I went to Chrysalis Radio and worked with Richard Huntingford, the chief executive of the broader Chrysalis radio to music to books group, and Phil Riley, the chief executive of the radio division, and I learnt there more about delegation and hands-off persuading and influencing, and really motivating. And some of the finest leadership I'd ever experienced in my life was at that place. And then John Myers, who was a radio god, and just his ability to ride the waves and enjoy life and go with your gut feeling sometimes, always with John, and usually with some degree of success. So a lot of different people of incredibly different personalities, and I thank them all. And also people I've worked with, just the Wendy, the receptionist at Leicester Sound, was just the most inspiring human being, and the way that she ran that company from her reception desk. And you talk about persuading and influencing, from a generation where women didn't always rise very easily up the ranks, plus the chance, même chose, but actually quietly she was the best manager and leader in that building for many generations.
And when you talked about there with at Chrysalis Group and working with Phil and Richard, that you learn particularly about delegation. You and I have never had the privilege of working closely together. So, but I imagine you to be the kind of person that is a doer. And therefore, when you moved into management, was there a desire to just get on and do it yourself?
Yeah. And I tried and did it wrongly at first, I think. Particularly when you come from a small organisation and move to a big one, and your role is broader, you have to be more hands off, and you have to have the time and space to think of the things that the busy people around you don't have time to, and make sure that they all join together in the middle. And I think I made mistakes sometimes not delegating enough. And then I would say in my last gig, probably to Ryan, I probably delegated a bit too much, and tried to, it delegated too much things that actually I should have kept a closer hand on. So it's a fine balance.
And it's one that, you continually learn out of it. And certainly for me is, I still make the mistakes today. Should I be doing that, or should I pass that on, or is there working largely for myself? And you get into that thing of doing everything yourself because there is just you, and then when you start working more collaboratively with other people, you don't let go as much as you should, and allow them to be able to do it. And then, or conversely, as you say, let go too much. So it's something that I don't think I'll ever get the balance totally right. I'm kind of learning all the time. Do you find that the same?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no right answer, because the people to whom you are delegating are all of very different. Some people are really ready for the delegation, and some aren't. And isn't it great though when you just have faith in someone to delegate to, and you just see them rising? And you will have done the same. There are people that you met when they were shy, very shy 17-year-olds, and then suddenly they're moving down the road to run a radio group. You just think, oh, and it's such a wonderful feeling when you think, I knew, and I've seen some people on work experience walk through. I had a conversation. I thought, you'll do it. Yeah. Within an hour of meeting them, you know whether they'll do it.
Yeah. And conversely,
yes.
And we've all got many stories of those, I'm sure. We've talked about people that have inspired you professionally, and you mentioned Wendy at Leicester Sound and the incredible leadership skills and influencer skills that she illustrated and demonstrated daily. Who has been the biggest influence on you as a person outside of work, in terms of who you are today? Who would that be?
Wow. The danger is asking somebody in radio about life outside work is there isn't much outside work. Life, hobbies, friends, everybody is through that, and that's not a very healthy place to be. But those friendships are deep and themselves stretch beyond radio. But they usually start out in radio. But I admire a lot of different people. But when you look at what's driven you, I think I have my dad's work ethic, and I talked about the amount of work he did, and family of five, and 2 jobs. And he was, I only realised it only occurred to me, he had a job, he was a counsellor, he was a school governor, he had a second job, and I just think, how do you fit all that in? But he did it because he was typing at 11 o'clock at night for a second job, as I'm typing at 11 o'clock at night for working on the Boom project. So I think that work ethic was partially my dad, and also he used to love writing. He was a brilliant writer. His complaint letters were just beautiful, and I read mine. I'm just writing like my dad now. So those words and the way he put them together, I think I was reading that as a kid and admiring that. So I would say my dad was a key influence in all those. My mother was an influence emotionally. My dad was an influence practically.
And you mentioned your mum there, and she had the challenges of shyness, etc., that you said you kind of got from her, but she overcame those as well as she got older, which is quite remarkable, especially in those kind of circles, and for a woman at that time as well. Amazing strength of character.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, Jan Tiffany at Galaxy in Yorkshire, again, very similar. How can you say two people are similar? No, two people are really similar. But in the same way that Wendy did at Leicester Sound, Jan ran that company. And she was someone who just thought that being a receptionist was possibly what person like her should be doing, and you just talk to her and realize actually you should be managing director here. You just see all those skills, and there was a whole generation of particularly as I've grown up, women who should have been doing more impressive jobs, but that wasn't, those opportunities were not easy to find.
No, absolutely.
They were easy to find, but they weren't easy to get the jobs,
Yeah, and I've spoken to some remarkable women in this podcast series, and truly inspiring. But it's still a challenge for them to get to the top in any given profession. A lot of areas, whilst a lot has changed, in a lot of areas nothing has changed, which is such a shame.
Yeah, absolutely.
David, we have a thing on the show which we call the Columbo moment, and it's one last thing, as Peter Falk used to say at the end of it. Just one last thing. What's a little bit of advice, a tip, or a takeaway that you can leave the listener with, that is something that has helped you a lot in your career, in your life, or has been something that you've shared and you've seen it help so many other people? Is there, and I know for many people that there are so many, but is there one that you'd like to share?
I'm going to give you one that wasn't going to give you. So you'll never know what the other one was. As a tease, next week. I think it is just about the power of words. And that sounds like a blindingly obvious thing to say, but because words are free when we write them down and when we speak them, we can throw them away. And each one has an incredible effect. In speeches I give on this topic, we know we can start wars with words. We can certainly end them, thankfully, with words as well. And they make people vote for you or otherwise. And a lovely example is when you get turned down for a job and they call you with we're going to turn you down for this job. And they talk to you for 5 or 10 minutes, giving you all sorts of flannel and rubbish. And you'll put the phone down and your other half will say, what do they say? And you'll come out with the 3 words of criticism. That was the reason they said I was X, Y, and Z. And those 3 words will live with you forever. And had there been different 3 words, those other 3 words would have lived with you forever. So, the power of words for good and for ill, whether you're writing them down, whether you're designing a multi-million-pound ad campaign, even those sometimes don't get the attention they deserve. The graphics get loads of attention, the words don't. And of course, as a broadcaster, if you think you're just about to do the link that actually is really, really special, not to have considered the key words you're going to use. You might not write it down, but you've got an idea of where you're going and how you're going to get there. So it sounds a blindingly obvious one, but I see a lot of evidence where clearly it isn't that obvious, the power of words, whatever you're doing.
So powerful, and what a great piece of advice. David, thank you so much, not just for your time and wisdom today, but your continued support to me and your inspiration to me and so many others. David, thank you.
Well, I feel quite humble hearing that, Roger. Thank you for all you've done in your many careers, and good luck with this programme.
If you enjoyed the Friel podcast, why don't you like it? Write a 5-star review, subscribe to it, or share it across all your socials. I'd really appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.